It is winter in Prague. Night is rising in the mother of cities and over her 1,000 spires. Look down at the darkness around your feet, in all the lanes and alleys, as if it were a soft black dust swept there by a broom. Look at the stone apostles on the old Charles Bridge, and at all the blue-eyed jackdaws on the shoulders of St. John of Nepomuk. Look, she's coming over the bridge, head bent down to the whitening cobblestones. Helen Franklin, 42, neither short nor tall, her hair neither dark nor fair. On her feet, boots which serve from November to March, and her mother's steel watch on her wrist. A table salt glitter of hard snow, falling on her sleeve, her shoulder, her neat coat belted, as colourless as she is, 9 years worn. Across her breast, a narrow satchel strap. In the satchel, her afternoon's work and a green, uneaten apple. What might commend so drab a creature to your sight, when overhead the low clouds split, and the upturned bowl of a silver moon pours milk out on the river? Nothing at all, but this. These hours, these long minutes of this short day, must be the last, when she knows nothing of Melmoth. When thunder is just thunder, and a shadow only darkness on the wall. Helen Franklin pauses where the bridge meets the embankment. Trams rattle on up to the National Theatre. It's 2 weeks past Christmas, but the mechanical tree in the old town square turns and plays one final pleasing strain of Strauss, and women from Hove and Hartlepool clasp paper cups of steaming wine. It is pleasant enough for an evening's self-deceit, but no more. Helen is not deceived, nor has she ever been. The pleasures of Bohemia are not for her. Guilty of a crime for which she fears no proper recompense can ever be made, she is in exile, and willingly serves her full life term, having been her own jury and judge. The lights change. The crowd surges on. Helen is taken on the noisy tide and pitches up against an iron railing. It is then she hears her own name lifted on the wind coming off the river, called frantically, as if perhaps she dropped her purse. She looks up and sees, standing still beneath a streetlight, coatless and shivering, a tall man, blue-shirted, clutching a large, dark object to his chest. Carol Prajan constitutes precisely half her complement of friends and acquaintances, their friendship struck up in the cafe of the National Library of the Czech Republic. Even at this distance, it is possible to make out the greyish pallor, the sunken eyes of a man who does not sleep. "Carol," she says, and moves unhurriedly towards him. 10 paces on, she sees he holds a document file, its leather black and coarse. It is worn pale at the edges from much use. It is bound 3 times with a leather cord. "Carol," she says, "put on my scarf. What's happened? Where's your coat? Are you hurt?" A likelier thought occurs. Is it Thea? She pictures Thea, his partner and certainly his better half, lifeless in her wheelchair on the ground floor. "Thea," Carol is impatient. "What? No, she's fine. No, I don't want it." He pushes fretfully at the offered scarf, then surveys her as if he cannot think why she's troubled him. "I suppose we should sit down." He looks about, as if he might simply sit cross-legged on the pavement. Then he lifts the leather file and shakes it at her. She sees it is heavy, stuffed with documents and stained with water. He moves his thumb and reveals in the corner a rubbed gilt monogram reading J.A.H. "It's no good. I shall have to tell someone, and you, of all people, will bear it. I mean..." He breaks off and laughs without merriment. "I believe she could walk up and look you dead in the eye, and still you'd not believe it. Not a word." "She? Who is she?" "Oh," he grows vague. "You'll see." The place is familiar. The wet fug on the windows, the green ashtrays, the 40-watt bulbs in their green glass shades. Helen sits beside her friend and gestures to a girl in a white shirt, orders beer for Carol, and for herself only water from the tap. Carol neatens his hair. "Look at me. I do not sleep. As you see, I sit up at night, reading and rereading. I didn't want to bother Thea, so I read under the covers, with a torch, like a boy." "And what have you been reading? Is it this, here in this file?" "Yes." He shakes out a Petra cigarette and lights it on the third attempt. "Take it." She opens the file, and there spills out across the table a sheaf of yellowing paper. "May I look?" "If you want. Oh, wait. The door is wrenched open, the velvet curtains billow. "Is it her? Has she come? Do you see her?" Helen turns. "It's only men," she says. "2 men, quite ordinary." Carol laughs, shrugs, rises once more in his seat. "Don't mind me," he says. "Lack of sleep, It's only... I thought I saw someone I knew." Helen turns to the manuscript. It is written in German, in a tilted copper plate as difficult to read as it must have been to master. There are crossings out and numbered footnotes. The effect is of a palimpsest pulled from museum archives. But the title page is dated 2016. Separately, fastened with a paperclip, one typed sheet of check is dated the preceding week and is addressed to Carol. "It's not intended for me," says Helen, turning the page face down. "I wish you'd just tell me what's the matter. You're behaving like a child having nightmares." "All right." He draws breath, places both hands flat upon the document, and remains very still for a moment. Then he says, casually, easily, as if it has nothing at all to do with the matter at hand, "Tell me, do you know the name Melmoth?" "Melmoth? No. I'd remember it, I think." "Melmoth. Not Czech, is it? Not quite English either." "No, why would you? It meant nothing to me a week ago." There is again that unhappy laugh. "Do you ever feel," he says, "the back of your neck prick, all the hairs lifting there, as if a cold wind had come into the room and hunted you out, and only you?" He shakes his head, lights another cigarette, draws deeply, stubs it out. "It's no use. You wouldn't believe me, and would be foolish if you did. Here, take this. Take the letter. I'll get another drink and leave you to read." Helen thinks how tall he had seemed, how upright his bearing when he first approached her in the library cafe, there having been no other tables free. Having sat down, he turned his attention to some incomprehensibly complex diagram and to an apple pastry. Her own cup of black coffee was set beside a pamphlet which she was translating from German into English at the fee of 9p a word. Nothing more would have come of the encounter had Thea not arrived. Helen, looking up, had seen a woman of middle height and late middle years stooping to kiss Carol on the crown. Her hair was short and red. She smelt of cologne. She gave Helen a merry, appraising look. "Have you made a friend?" she said to Carol in English, and Helen had blushed because the inflection, if not precisely unkind, had been disbelieving. Carol looked up from his notebook and surveyed Helen with vague surprise, as if in the intervening minutes he'd forgotten she was there, then said swiftly in Czech that he was sorry to disturb her and that they would leave her in peace. Conscious of a desire to wrong-foot this elegant pair, Helen had said in English, "Please don't go on my account, I'm leaving anyway," and begun to return her work to her satchel. Thea then had brightened. "Oh, but that accent! You've brought me home in my time of exile. London? Essex, perhaps? Stay, won't you? Sit, let me bring you more coffee. Carol, insist she stays." There had been then a look of understanding that passed between Carol and Helen, which was a surer footing for friendship than any Helen had felt for years. And indeed there had been no use resisting. That weekend, Helen Franklin was welcomed into an apartment where Thea stirred a copper pan on the stove, and Carol sat at a scrubbed table measuring the depth of a curve on a convex glass disc. He was, she discovered, attached to a university department, his subject that of the history of the manufacture of glass. Thea, who had 10 years on her partner, was attentive and warm, though always with faint amusement, as if she found her guest odd, but not unpleasantly so. Helen said to her, "Do you teach at the university too?" "I'm retired," said Thea. "She was a barrister back in England," said Carol. "It had been all work and no pleasure, so I took a holiday in Prague, and that became a sabbatical, and that became a retirement. And then, of course, there was Carol." "How long have you lived in Prague?" 20 years. "And what do you do?" "I work as a translator, though my German is better than my Czech." "How wonderful! What are you working on at the moment? Schiller? A new edition of Sebald?" "An instruction manual for operating Bosch power tools." Helen smiled then, and she smiles now, remembering. "I can't pretend I'm not disappointed. And you came to Prague because—" Helen flushed. How could she explain her exile, her self-punishment, to these smiling strangers? They are gone now, those easy evenings, have seemed, in the few months since Thea's stroke, to have actually been erased. And now she's at this small table with this new Carol, stooping, uneasy, a little frantic. She draws the sheet of paper towards her and reads, "My dear Dr. Prajan,
how deeply I regret that I must put this document in your hands, and so make you the witness to what I have done. 10 days have passed, and all the while I have been thinking only of my fault, my most grievous fault. I walk through the city in the dark and think I hear her footsteps, and I find that I'm holding out my hand, but she offered me her hand once, and I doubt she'll offer it again."
An old man confessing some long-forgotten sin which doubtless could not these days tweak the eyebrow of the most ascetic priest. Nonetheless, there is something curious in its fear and longing that is something very like the half-shamed, anxious glances of her friend. Carol returns with food. "Well?" he says, with a not quite pleasant grin. Helen gives him a quick, kind look. "You know, it would be simpler if you just told me about it." He laughs then. Carol returns the sheaf of papers to its file, and the tremor has gone from his hands. "All right," he says. "I'll tell you everything." On compassionate leave from Charles University, Thea having suffered her stroke, Carol went daily to his library desk to escape his guilt and shame. The woman in the chair was not, he could not pretend otherwise, the woman with whom he'd passed a decade. Released from his duties, Carol sat himself at desk 220 as he always had, photographing, mumbling, taking notes. In the afternoons, meeting Helen in the cafe for cakes filled with poppy seed paste. On perhaps the second week, his gaze was drawn by an elderly man at desk 209. All around him, students typed rapidly before their glowing screens, but this man had brought a pot of ink into which he dipped his pen with mechanical regularity. The following morning, coming early to the cafe for coffee and a pastry, Carol found the old man seated at an empty table. He set his own plate down and said, "May I join you?" Startled, the old man had cast his eyes about the room. Then, putting his palm on the chair beside him, as if to indicate that he was shortly to be joined by another, said vaguely, Well, that chair, I think, is free." His check was careful and decorous. His German accent, that of a man for whom Prague's river would always, really, be the Moldau. "You work hard," said Carol, gesturing to a leather file on the table. "You put us all to shame." Then he said, "Karl Prajan." He put out his hand. "Josef Hoffmann," said the man. "A pleasure." And in the days that followed, it was a pleasure to encounter Hoffmann in the cafe. He was in all things intelligent, courteous, quiet, and rather shy. If asked what it was he was writing, he would say, "Only an old man's recollections that will never be read," and without rancour changed the subject. When Carol came to the library that last morning, he found himself first to arrive. No librarians yet at their post, the ranks of desks miserably empty. How dark it was, with no lamp shining. But no, a single light was switched on, there, far at the back. It shone down and illuminated a sleeping scholar. "Josef," said Carol to himself, hardly surprising, really, that the old man, 94 and weary, had taken a nap. He reached the desk and lightly put his hand on Hoffmann's shoulder. But Hoffmann didn't wake, only fell aside, slumped against the green surface of the desk. "Josef," he said again, and this time shook the shoulder beneath his hand. The head lolled, rotating on the thin corded neck, so that it turned a blind face up to its tormentor. The eyes were open. They were green. They gazed at Carol, imploring, in an expression of fear and dread. Beside him, another chair had been prepared. It was tilted, as if he'd been deep in conversation with a companion who'd long since left. Beneath the chair, something unmoving, ill-defined, a scrap of dark, fine fabric, perhaps. Oh, very dark, very fine, like the hem of a woman's dress. As Carol watched, it slipped, as fabric sometimes does, moved again, as if a breeze passed over it. Carol, in a daze, put out his hand. Then a window slipped its latch and blew back against the wall. He cried out and turned. A jackdaw lighted on the sill, blinked its blue eye once, and left. Carol pauses, lights another cigarette. The file is on the table between them. "That he is dead doesn't trouble me," he says. "I miss him, that's all. It's what came later." He stands. "Look, I must get back. You take this. Then you'll see." He unwinds the leather cord again and withdraws a sheaf of paper. It is only half the contents. This he gives to her without flourish or warning. "Read it or not, I don't care. Come and see us next week. Then you can have the rest of it, if you like." Helen Franklin lives east of the river on the 5th floor of an apartment block. There is a lift, which she doesn't use. She only ever takes the stairs. At the threshold, she pauses. The door is ajar, awaiting the inevitable call. A woman's voice, grainy, querulous. "Helen, is that you?" "Of course," she says. "Of course it's me," and goes in. Follow her in, and what you will see is this: the small, dark flat, densely packed with furniture, which jostles like condemned cattle in a crate. It is all so wholly out of keeping with Helen, with her neat, unadorned clothes, her smooth, greying hair and swift, calm gait. But if you open the door along the passage, you would see a room which is white-painted, plain, a narrow bed and a dressing gown hanging from the back of the door, a small, plain desk and a small, plain chair, a narrow wardrobe in which a modest number of modest outfits hang, and beneath them 3 modest pairs of shoes. Here Helen sleeps, eats, and studies. She does not listen to music. The walls and the mattress are bare. In the dim hall, she sets her satchel down. "Helen, I said, is that you?" And there is her companion, waddling on bowed legs, the joints of her hips worn down, splayed and weak like those of a baby. Dependent these days on an aluminium frame which catches against the carpet and in doing so is volubly cursed. She is in black, this woman, many layers of it, the layers containing the detritus of a week's meals and the scent of sandalwood, talc, and sweat. She is decked in garnet, in cheap black chips of it, on her ears and fingers, and in a brooch on her breast which glitters like a smashed black plate. This is Albina Horakova, 90 years old, malicious, unkind, devoted to sentimental opera and Turkish delight. Helen takes in a breath and says, "Yes, it is me, it's always me, and never anyone else." The women survey each other with a depth of dislike plumbed an inch deeper each day. Helen had ended one brief tenancy in a dreary room in a stranger's house and sought another. Carol had said, "There's Albina Horakova, I suppose, always looking for a lodger. They only ever last a month or so. Dreadful old bitch, nobody can stand her, except Thea, of course, but quite entertaining in her way." Helen endures it as she endures every discomfort, every hard thing, patiently, and as her just reward. Helen hangs her coat, places her boots beneath it, and makes a pot of weak black tea. This she carries into her room and sets on the desk beside the sheaf of paper. She stands for a long moment. Is she uneasy now? A little. It is as if she feels a pair of eyes fixed on her, unblinking, calculating. She turns, and there is only the dressing gown on the hook, the satchel on the bed. She sits at the desk and takes out the manuscript. She takes a sip of bitter tea and begins to read.
My name is Josef Adelmar Hoffmann. I was born in 1926 in a village east of the river Eger in the independent state of Czechoslovakia. We lived in a small house not far from the river. I suppose my parents loved me as parents must, but I cannot praise them as a good son should, for they meant no harm, but did no good. They were dull, and they made a dull boy duller. One incident alone from that part of my life I recall with perfect clarity. My walk to school took me on a narrow track past a field of wheat, where often I saw the farmer picking stones by hand in winter. Now, this farmer had a habit of leaving out some form of seat in the field, which I never once saw him use. In winter, a wooden crate. In summer, a bale of hay. I even once saw a small dining chair set out in the harrowed field. But he must have been admonished by his wife, for I never saw it again. Encountering him one morning on the path, I screwed up my courage and asked what purpose these empty seating places served. "Why, it is for she, of course," he said. Then he gripped me by the shoulder. "It is for the wanderer, for the witness, for she who is cursed to walk from Jerusalem to Constantinople, from Ireland to Kazakhstan, she who watches, whose eyes are upon you in your guilt and transgression, from whom God has withdrawn even the respite of sleep." I left him with the idea that some damned soul required that he should leave out for her a resting place in case she should happen by, and that he'd glimpsed her once as a boy and lived in terror and hope that he might one day see her again. Later that same day, I lingered after school to speak to Herr Schröder and ask if he too had seen that single chair set out in a harrowed wheat field. "It is nothing but a story told to children to keep them in line," he said. "You know, As your Bible has taught you, that a company of women came to Jesus' tomb and found it empty, and the stone rolled away, and right there in the garden they saw the risen Son of God. But among them was one who later denied that she had ever seen the resurrected Christ. Because of it, she is cursed to wander the earth without home or respite until Christ comes again. So she is always watching, always seeking out everything that's most distressing and most wicked in a world which is surpassingly wicked and full of distress. In doing so, she bears witness where there is no witness, and hopes to achieve her salvation. Well, that's the legend, he said. And this is her name, Melmoth the Witness, or Melmoth, or Melmotka, depending on the town where you were born. But what you must remember is this, that she is lonely, with an eternal loneliness which will end only when our world ends and she receives her pardon. So she comes to those at the lowest ebb of life, and those she chooses feel her eyes on them. Then they look up, they see her watching, and she holds out her arms and says, "Take my hand. I've been so lonely." I shivered then and asked what became of those who take her hand. Herr Schröder laughed. "Nobody knows what happens," he said. "Because she isn't real. Put it from your mind, young Hoffman. You are too old for fairy tales." Calamity came to my family in 1936. The Moser factory, whose frail bowls and flutes were no match for factory-made glass, laid off many staff, and my father among them. I suppose we may have fallen into poverty had not my mother's brother died childless, leaving her the sole beneficiary of his will. He had owned a shoe shop, and by the close of that year we had left behind the Eger and the Lindens and Herr Schröder's school, and become part of the little group of ethnic Germans living at that time in Prague. I had within arm's reach the city of 1,000 spires, but every afternoon I stood behind the counter with my mother, wrapping in brown paper the sandals and slippers she sold. I turned 11, then 12, acquired breadth of body and none of mind. No school companions invited me to their homes, and I never thought to invite them to mine. Our only visitor was the policeman, whose beat included the shop. He was a childless and fatherly man, whose mother had been German, and who was delighted to speak to my mother in the language he knew better than Czech. She called him Polizist Novak, as if they'd met on a Berlin street, and not Rodney Novak, as the Czechs did. And though I dimly understood that this was a small act of defiance, I could not comprehend why it gave my mother such pleasure. I grew fond of him because he made my mother laugh, a feat which lay far beyond my father. One property on our street had evidently been empty since long before we'd come to live nearby. One morning I was astonished to find a sign swung above the door on a wrought iron bracket. It read, "Books and Maps," and the paint was wet and red. Two children stood laughingly directing a woman as she pinned up a map of Bohemia in a fine brass frame. I watched the light striking their sleek fair heads, and thought the woman very beautiful. Then one of the children turned, and his blue, intelligent eyes met mine with a sensation like the touch of hand on hand. Just as I saw him, how straight he stood, and how the sun picked out the whiteness of his shirt, I saw also myself. It was as if I'd been without warning placed before a mirror. I saw my lumpish face and the rough hair my mother cut, saw the down-turned mouth and greenish eyes that had no gleam to them. Was it then I hated him, I wonder? Or was it later, when I saw how often he laughed, and how fondly his mother put her hand on that sleek blonde head? The hatred lodged in me as though I had swallowed a stone. The boy came into the shop one Saturday afternoon, not wanting shoes, but wanting me. He spoke to my mother, and he charmed her more than I ever had. He said, "Frau Hoffmann, may I introduce myself to your son? I am new to Prague, and I should make friends." He was German, it seemed, and I knew this would please my mother. He stuck out his hand. "I am Franz Bayer," he said. "Look outside, that's my sister, Freddie." I shook his hand and waved at the girl beyond the glass, another creature of white blonde hair and direct blue eyes. "Look here," said the boy. "Come and see what we've got. It was our birthday yesterday, you see, and we've got a radio, and nobody to show it to." I didn't want to leave the dreary shop and my dreary parents, where my own dreariness passed without notice. But my mother smoothed her dress in a manner so strange and coquettish I would have liked to kick her. "Of course he'll come and play," she said. "Won't you, Joseph? I can spare you an hour or two." Franz took my arm. I don't believe that anyone had ever taken my arm before. Freddie did not look very like her twin. The resemblance was there in the gestures and the ease and in the unwavering looks she gave, but her face was quite different. I recall it now as I have recalled it every day since. The freckles across her nose, only 8 of them, and the deep bow to her lip. I loved her as readily and without reason as I hated her brother. I found myself in a room of a kind that I had never seen before. Everything in it was so affectionately chosen that it did not seem furnished so much as inhabited. I was bewildered and resentful. What right did they have to bring me here, where I could only look even more drab and more dull than ever? I was 13 years old. I did not know what to say or how. I hardly even knew how to feel. Then Franz said, "What do you make of this?" They were standing now in front of an oak sideboard, obscuring something from my view. "There," said Freddie, and with a funny little bow showed me a radio set on a green velvet cloth edged in gold brocade. I'd seen radios before, of course I had, but I'd never seen one so close, and certainly not one so grand. Then they turned the radio on, and I heard cabaret music. Freddie danced, but not in the decorous fashion we were taught at school, counted diligently out. It made her white skirt lift and show her bare thighs, and the pale downy hair that grew above her knees. She spun and spun, laughing, and I saw once, very briefly, the hem of some pink satin garment which seemed obscene under her childish dress. I didn't want to look because it made me feel sick, or so I thought. though I know better now what it was. Then the decadent music gave way to something martial, and Franz took my arm and marched me up and down. Freddie, petulant and suddenly bored, curled up in an armchair and began to read. Franz said, "Well, what do you think?" Proudly he put his hand on the curved case of the radio, then turned the dial to make the music bloom and fade. "It's all right," I said, and shrugged. Then Frau Bayer came in. "Splendid. Are you Franz's new friend? He told me you were coming." "I am Joseph Hoffmann," I said, and could say no more. It grew dark. Franz said to me that perhaps I should go. Of course, it was not that he wanted me to, only that he'd promised my mother that I wouldn't be kept too long. He asked me again what I had thought of the radio, and I said I thought it very good, very clever. His pleasure shone out of him then, and I despised him for it. They said goodbye with a kind of formal affection that felt somehow like mockery. I was the sole ugly object in that room, and they treated me like something precious. Then Franz took my arm and conducted me formally through the dark shop. "Goodbye," he said, and receded into the darkness. Then, before the door had quite swung shut, he said, "Come back, won't you?" His hand appeared through the gap between door and frame. He waggled it humorously, then held it out and waited. I looked at it, at the white cuff of his shirt and the narrow wrist and the long fingers, and I hated him then as I had hated him from the first. I turned my back. I never spoke to them again. I walked alone until I reached our shop, and when I looked up I saw that it was altered. The lights were out, and so was the single bulb that shone above the side door where I was to enter. As I watched, the darkness began to deepen. It was as if it were not merely absence of light, but a gap into which every bad thing was being slowly sucked. It pulsed. I saw it. It widened and narrowed and widened again, as though it were gasping for breath. It suddenly seemed to me that all that is worst in the hearts of women and men had substance, and were massing there like a swarm of flies. Then the substance of it changed. It was like lengths of fine black silk hung there in the doorway, stirred by a breeze. Then those lengths grew and spilled like ink down the steps. There was no sound from anywhere. The street was empty, save for a great black crowd of jackdaws seeking out places to rest. I knew then that I was watched. My body strained towards my watcher. I was terribly afraid, but there with the terror was something else which was very like the sickness I'd felt as I watched Freddie dancing while the cabaret played on. It was a kind of frightened longing, like a man who sees a lover he has hopelessly longed for, and in his lover's hands a noose. And I knew beyond doubt that my watcher was a woman. Very slowly I turned. Nobody was there.
Helen ponders that name which has become familiar in the passing of an hour or so. Melmoth. She lies on the bare mattress, sleeps well. And since she sleeps well and deeply, you may look again at that characterless room. If you kneel, you'll see beneath the bed a cardboard box. Bring it out, put it where the street light shines, and lift off the lid. Here is what is kept inside. A picture of a young man, black-haired, laughing through green-rimmed sunglasses on a city balcony. A small book, hardback, cloth-bound, blue. The poems of Rilke, not translated. The lyrics of a sentimental pop song decorated with pencil in the margins. A ticket for what might perhaps be a tram in a foreign country. A bottle of perfume from which the liquid has long evaporated, but which has a sweet, strong scent. They are well handled, these things. The box has grown fragile from being withdrawn and concealed, pored over, held. What you have in your hands is all that remains of the time when Helen Franklin lived. Everything before it was prologue. Everything after, a footnote. Eight days pass. Carol and Thea live just beyond the old town square, where Helen slips through unseen and largely unseeing. She reaches her friend's apartment and sees that the familiar door is open by barely the width of a forefinger. She surveys that long black ribbon between the door and its frame. Manners forbid the crossing of a threshold uninvited, but it seems to her that something is awry. "Carol," she calls. "Thea, it's me." There is silence. She goes in. She stands in the little hall with its umbrella stand, its coat hooks, and listens. Then she is arrested by a sound which comes from the room beyond, and which seems only to approximate the human. She shoves at the door and with a sharp, hard action turns on the light. At the head of the table there is a wheelchair. Seated there is Thea, with both hands curled in her lap and her feet on the footplates turned in like those of a child sick since birth. Her head is thrown against the black leather back of the chair. There are 3 wine glasses on the table, and they have all been drunk dry. Helen moves closer, and as she does so, Thea's jaw is snapped upward, moves swiftly in a circular motion, then falls again to the accompaniment of what is unmistakably a snore. It is loud enough to wake her, this one. "Helen, what are you doing here?" "Thea," says Helen, and delivers to their equal astonishment a slap across her cheek. The other woman slowly shakes her head and regards her from beneath heavy, slumberous lids. "Have they gone? That is—" Thea looks from left to right. "Has he gone? I think he's gone, you know. I said, in the end, you'll go." She is silent a moment, then frowning says, "Tell me, is there a woman here?" "I am here," says Helen, "but Carol isn't. Thea, have you been ill? Ought we to phone for help?" She waits, for Thea dislikes silence and is generally minded to fill it. But she does not. Helen, Englishwoman that she is, briskly pats the table. "Well then, let me put the kettle on, and we'll have tea." Thea cradles a cup between 2 hands, which is how she takes her tea these days. Sighing, she says, "Better. God, my head. What has happened? I don't remember any of it." Helen watches. She listens and finds no new slurring in her speech. Not another stroke, then. "Wake up and tell me what you can. But first, let me call Carol. Let me do that." And she does, 3 times, and is 3 times unanswered. "Tell me what you remember. Look, here, 3 glasses, and all the wine gone. Was there a guest?" "A guest?" Thea fumbles at her cup, sets it down, ignores the spill. "Oh, we've had a guest for weeks, let me tell you. It has been 3 of us since that damned document entered the house. He and I and this spectre." With a sudden show of spite, she swipes at the cup with her wrist. It breaks against the floor. Has he told you about it? About her? About Melmoth? Melmoth, says Thea. My God, he comes home with this stinking folder some mad old fool left him, and everything changed. Oh, it was changed already. Everything between us. You've seen it. The light went out when I did. Helen clears up the broken porcelain, the spilled tea, and pours more. Go on, she says. I don't see him. He puts me to bed, and it's as if he can live then, with me out of the way, with the old woman out of sight. Then all night he sits up, reading over his manuscripts, making notes, bringing home books and letters. Sometimes he'd say, Melmoth the witness is watching me, making a joke of it for my sake. But it's hardly unknown, is it, to laugh most when you're most afraid. Watch Helen. Something alters. Until this moment, Melmoth has had less currency than fairy tales, for she is newly acquired. Cinderella, Bluebeard, Peter Pan, these are bred in the bones and accepted without hesitation. Melmoth has not had this luxury, but must instead announce herself to the imagination, must rap 3 times upon the door. And it is now that Helen at last hears the rapping on the door and opens it, and Melmoth walks into the room. Thea attempts to reach for notebooks and sheaves of paper half concealed beneath a pile of novels. Get those, would you? Take a look, go on. I will, Helen says. But you haven't told me yet what happened tonight. Who was here and where Carol has gone? Thea frowns. We had been cross with each other. I wanted to go out. I said I could walk a little if he'd push me as far as the square. And Carol wouldn't take me. He'd found something, he said, something about a watching woman, in Essex of all places. So then I had wine, which I shouldn't, and I said, if I'm losing you to some other woman, you ought to tell me about her at least. And he did. She stops then and raises her head. I can tell you, she said, if you like. Yes. Tell me, said Helen. You know the legend by now, I should think, that a group of women went to Christ's tomb to anoint his body, but the stone was rolled back and he was gone. Women being what we are, they ran at once to tell the menfolk, who thought it all idle gossip, as well they might. And among those women was the one they now call Melmoth, and she flatly denied what she'd seen and said her friends had cooked it all up between them. So she was cursed, not with death, but with deathlessness, to wander the earth until Christ returns, condemned always to appear where all's most cheerless, dark and deadly. Cruel, if true, says Helen lightly. Well, that's the Almighty all over, isn't it? Thea contemplates her empty cup, then looks beyond Helen down the lamplit hall. Then she says, Carol told me all this the day that Hoffman died, and he brought that document home. We laughed and said, isn't it strange that we never heard the story as children? But after that, he left earlier for the library every day and came home later every night, collecting books and papers that had nothing to do with his usual line of work. Look, see for yourself. A letter dated 1637, a novel nobody's read, a journal by some artist neither you nor I ever heard of. Then he stopped going out at all. Only sat here poring over his books. Then today came, and we fought, and I made him tell me what he'd learned. Go on. It's all vague. I'm a hopeless witness. But I know he took my hand, saying, Hoffman was right, you know, the old fool. There were accounts of her all over Europe and the Middle East, he said, and it's always the same. A woman in dark clothes, seen just at the very corner of your eye, slipping from view when you turn your head. It is Melmoth the witness, wandering the earth until she's weary and her feet are bleeding. And she's lonely, and she wants a companion. She's seen not only every action, but every thought, every shameful secret, every private cruelty. There, Helen, you shivered. Don't you worry, we're only children telling tales by the fire. But it is quite impossible not to turn slowly, to look with a shameful prick of fear at the window and see that it is fastened. Helen says, but if she's been watching all their lives, watching since they were children, are they damned then? Is there no hope? Thea frowns. I've surveyed the evidence, she says, gesturing at the papers on the table. Sometimes she's seen once, and never again. What then? Says Helen. When she waits for you, what does she do? In every legend, in every account, it's always the same. She holds out her arms and says, take my hand, I've been so lonely. That would be tempting, wouldn't it, if you felt no other hand would ever be offered, to take hers and go wherever she took you. So does she only come for the most wicked of us? I think not, says Thea. There is a story there in Carol's papers of Melmoth coming to a prison cell, but the prisoner has done nothing wrong. She is merely in despair, but all the same, Melmoth was watching. Then is nobody safe? Nobody, I think, who might be tempted, even if it's just because they're lonely, to take her hand. Last night Carol told me all this, and then we drank, and it made me dazed, and someone was here, someone in black. Another glass, you see. 3 glasses, 3 chairs. I remember Carol talking softly. Then, my dear Helen, I was aware of nothing until you saw fit to give me, a woman of indifferent constitution, a good hard slap. She laughs, which permits Helen to laugh also. Then she grows serious and says, go on. You've got some of the Hoffman document. You may as well take the rest. Helen stands, and lightly touching her shoulder in passing, begins to gather the notebooks and documents disordered on the table. Listen, Helen, I feel sick. I should think you do, says Helen briskly. You must go to bed. I can't go to bed without Carol. I can't get in. Helen surveys her friend. Have you tried? Thea is petulant. It does not sit well on her. I don't want to try. Why should I? He shouldn't have left me. I shouldn't be alone. Since I'm here, why don't you see how far you can walk? Just see what you can do alone. Then you know what help you need. Think of it as gathering evidence. Thea is mollified. Very well. 20 uncertain paces, and Thea is on her bed. She shakes with the effort of it. She is breathless, but she cannot quite conceal her pride. Helen kneels. She removes Thea's slippers. If you can get in, you can get out. I will come back tomorrow evening, but sooner if you need me. She pauses. Then with a careful diffidence, she says, if it seems you need help, we can find it, I'm sure. Sleep well. I'll close the door. Let's not let Melmoth in. And Thea laughs and feigns fear. Before she goes home, Helen puts in her satchel the remainder of Josef Hoffmann's document. From Thea's room, the long, shallow breaths of a sleeper. Helen Franklin turns out the light and leaves. In the old town square it is quiet. Only Master Jan Hus, awaiting the flames of his martyrdom, cannot sleep a wink. But no, it is perhaps not only Master Hus. For if you are a diligent witness, you might see, concealed in the courtyard which Helen is now leaving, a figure dressed in black, patiently waiting, patiently watching, patiently biding its time. The following morning, Helen opens her eyes and finds that she is not alone. Albina Horakova leans against the doorframe and says, with something astonishingly like shyness, "Day after tomorrow, my birthday, 91, eh?" For a moment, the shyness vanishes behind spite. "You won't live so long, little weak, ugly Helen, but I did, yes. I want dinner." Albina names a cafe on the river overlooking the National Theatre. "You want me to come?" "You? The cripple? Come, why not?" "Well, I'd always thought you hated me," says Helen mildly. "I never hated anyone. I bake you cakes, don't I? Stupid girl." It is not entirely convincing. "All right, then," she says. "You win, Albina Horakova. Dinner." Thea and Carol's home is hardly 10 minutes distant, but all the same Helen hurries. She's certain there's a kind of echo to her footfall, that with each step her follower takes another, that with each pause her follower pauses. Schoolboys in yellow vests come hand in hand, herded by watchful teachers. They block her path and make it necessary to stop at the foot of curved stone steps leading up to the door of a church. She picks out very clearly the sound of someone singing. It is low and soft, and might be either a man or a woman, and the melody is one she hears at night while sleeping, which she sometimes wakes half singing and must instantly suppress. Its effect on Helen is like that of a blow to her back. She stumbles blindly up towards the door and blunders in. It is a heavy door, studded with iron, and beyond it, velvet curtains are hung against the chill. They enclose her, deliberately and with malicious intent. The heavy fabric wraps around her shoulders, her legs, causes her to stumble again and fall prostrate as a supplicant on the cold stone floor. Then the cloth releases her, and she finds she has come into a concert. In front of the altar, a woman has begun to sing. It is the kind of music that most disgusts her, a sort of melodious form of hysterics. Coming slowly to her feet, rubbing herself where she aches, Helen makes for the nearest chair. The song is a punishment. She has so long avoided music of any kind that to be compelled to submit to it now is intolerable. The music mercifully stops. There is desultory applause. Helen's knee is bleeding. She looks at it, and as she looks, a gloved hand appears, and somebody says shyly, "Are you all right?" Her accent is neither German, nor English, nor is it Czech. "I'm fine," says Helen. She presses her hand to her knee and looks without surprise at the blood in her palm. It is bleeding through her clothes. "I have something here." The gloved hand moves, is gone for a moment, and returns with a packet of tissues. "Press hard for a minute. It will be all right." Helen looks up and sees a young woman with soft hair growing thickly to her collar. She smiles, and it is, I think, a very appealing smile. Somewhat hesitant, very warm. "Have you far to go?" "Not at all. Just by Jakobska. I'm visiting my friend." "I'm walking that way too." The woman stands. The extreme plainness of her clothes suggests suddenly to Helen that she may be a nun. "Perhaps we could walk together." She flushes. "Only it's easy to fall when the snow freezes, you see." "That's very kind. I'm Helen, by the way." "Adaya," says the woman. She offers her arm. It occurs to Helen that she is not, of course, a nun, but a nurse. The snowfall has been thick and swift. Prague seems sleepy now beneath its freshly laundered eiderdown. Adaya says hesitantly, "You live here?" "I've lived here almost 20 years. "Look." Adaya gestures with the toe of a well-worn shoe to a place on the pavement which has been cleared of snow. A stumbling stone. These are familiar to Helen. Brass plates that mark places where men and women and children were taken from their homes to be murdered in the camps. Adaya removes her glasses. She says, "Murdered in Theresienstadt, 19th of August, 1942, and only just 16. I wonder, when God permitted us to fall, if he knew we'd fall so far." 16, says Helen. She bends to read the name, and when she has done so, she takes in a breath which is so sharp and so cold it seems to deposit a coating of hoar frost on her tongue. "Is it your knee?" says Adaya. "No, it's only that I've seen that name before." She steps back and looks at the windows behind the stumbling stone. It is a shop, rather handsome, and the blinds are down. It is all as she thought it would be. Thea answers the door on her feet. She is drunk. Everything about her is both grand and disordered. The cord of her dressing gown is coming loose, and there's nothing under it. "Helen Franklin," she says. It is necessary for her to lean against the wall if she's to give her usual double kiss, and as she does so, Helen looks instinctively behind her, down the dim hall, for the wheelchair. It is there, on the ramp. It is tipped on its side, and one wheel slowly spins. "You have brought a friend?" "I am Adaya," says the young woman. "How do you do?" Shyly she holds out her hand. "Absolutely delighted to meet you," says Thea. "Did you bring anything to drink?" "I don't think you should be standing," says Adaya. "Won't you take my arm?" "I do not need your help." Then she overbalances, reaches for support, encounters Adaya's offered arm. "It is merely the drink, you understand." "I quite understand." "Helen, where did you find this young person?" Helen watches. Adaya contrives to deposit Thea in an armchair, and having done so, claps her hands together with the satisfaction of a job well done, and smiles. "I fell over," she says, "and hurt my knee, and Adaya happened to see me." The room is warm and bright. All the same, there is the air of a home dispirited. There are plates of lonely, half-eaten meals scattered about. "How are you coping?" says Helen. "Aren't I dressed? Aren't I fed? You look wonderful, but—" Helen gestures to a teacup which has acquired a skin of mould. "I wonder if you could use help now and then. I was so grateful for Adaya today." She makes a show of rubbing her knee. "You have muscular atrophy and peripheral neuropathy." Adaya has removed her gloves and coat and is watching Thea. A steel watch is pinned above her narrow breast. "You have foot drop on the left and your balance is compromised. Have you applied for state social support?" "To be honest," Thea says, "I don't know what to do." It is very unlike her, this moment of defeat. "What has happened?" Helen says. "Is it Carol?" Thea reaches into her pocket. It takes effort, this, and withdraws a postcard. She hands it to Helen. It was posted from Prague. "Read it," says Thea. "I am at the airport. I don't know where I'm going, but I've gone. I'm sorry. Everything is different now. I am not myself. You are not yourself. For a long time I thought she was coming for me, but it was only ever shadows on the floor. I'm sorry. I loved you." You will note, no doubt, being yourself a student of language, the tense. "I am sorry," says Helen. Adaya begins to gather the mouldy teacups, the plates on which crusts of bread have begun to curl. "She's right, you know." Helen gestures to Adaya, who has gone now into the kitchen. "You ought to contact social services or perhaps hire a private nurse." "What about asking her?" says Thea. She watches Adaya return with a cloth, with which she wipes the table, the sideboard. "She seems to be some sort of nurse. She may know someone." It is curious, this placid acceptance of the woman's presence, as if she'd been expected all along. She disappears with the cloth, returns without it, sits beside Thea with her hands folded in her lap. Thea looks with kindly disdain at Adia's muddy tights, her scuffed shoes, the cheap gold cross on a silver chain. "It seems to me," she says, "that you could do with a job." Adia looks up, and Helen watches a flush of pleasure cross her cheek, and it occurs to her for the first time that perhaps she, too, is lonely. "You would like me to stay? I already have work," she says. "But I have time for more." "Yes, I would like it very much." "Well, then." Thea is triumphant. Adia stands without speaking and returns to the kitchen. In her absence, Thea nods at the documents on the table. "Have you read the Hoffman document? Horrid little boy, wasn't he?" "Only the first part." Again, Helen sees the stumbling stone. Adia returns with a plate. There is the scent of honey and melted butter. There is fragrant tea in a pot. There is also, in a plastic box designed for the purpose, a handful of tablets of various kinds. She sets these on the table beside the pile of books and documents. They nudge a sheet of paper which drifts to the floor. She stoops to pick it up. "Melmoth the Witness, Primary Sources." "We are researching, that's all." Thea has the faint hauteur of the mildly ashamed. "Oh yes, Melmoth. Doesn't everybody know?" Adia is unperturbed. "Not us," says Thea. "Not until recently. We know, of course," says Helen, "that it's only a legend." "Ah," Adia's shy smile grows teasing. "You don't imagine she is watching you? Perhaps your consciences are clear. Now, Thea, please, eat." Helen stands. She is tired. There's a dull ache in her knee. "I must go," she says, "but I will see you tomorrow, I think. Thea, have you had a call from Albina Horakova?" Thea laughs. A veritable royal summons. Dinner, and then, heaven help you, Helen, heathen that you are, the opera. 2 hours remain of the day, and Helen resolves to devote them to what is left of Josef Hoffmann's manuscript. Her apartment is silent. There is no fitful television light, no muttering from Albina Horakova's room. But Albina has been at work all the same, for there on Helen's bed is a pile of dark and flimsy fabric. It is a dress, very old, very fine, almost disintegrating at a touch. There is also a woolen wrap, cashmere, a pair of buckled shoes, and a handful of garnet jewellery glinting bloody in the light. Helen pictures herself in an opera box, a brass eyeglass raised to the stage, and laughs. Then she tosses the glittering pile to the floor, takes the Hoffman document from her desk, and lies on the hard, thin mattress to read.
Prague changed. But no more, it seemed to me, than a door is altered by a coat of paint. Red banners with the black swastika appeared on municipal buildings, and the German boys filled out their uniforms. Often when I passed the buyer shop, I heard the radio. Each time I thought of Freddie spinning in the warm room and saw Franz extend his hand towards me through the closing door. Each time I felt again the weight of desire and dislike. One January night, when I was 14, I walked home late from school. When I came to the buyer shop, it was closed, and the shutters were drawn down. But someone had left on the windowsill one of the stones that sometimes come free from the pavements, and it prevented the shutter from closing as it should. I put my face to the window. I saw the corner of the dining table and candles burning, and bread plaited like a schoolgirl's hair. I saw Frau Bayer standing with her arms raised over the candle and saw how their flames stirred as she moved. I saw her cover her face and stand for a time with her mouth moving. Then I saw Freddie stand beside her mother. She was not the child I remembered that night. She'd exchanged her white socks for stockings. Then I saw Franz. I saw his white fair head and saw how broad he had grown in the year since he had offered me his hand, and I rejected it. Then he closed the door. I understood what I had seen. My mind, always so sluggish and so dull, grew clear as water. These were the Jews against whom I'd been so often warned. This family, this girl who pouted as she read, this boy who had only wanted me to praise his radio. I shook my head until it ached. How they must have laughed to have taken me in, to have made me complicit in their crime. What crime it might have been I could not have said. I simply understood. I had been made to feel poor and drab and foolish. The year I turned 16, the Jews began to leave Prague. One morning I met Policist Novak on his beat and asked him what became of them. "Off to Theresienstadt," he said cheerfully. "Pleasant little town." Then he showed me his wrist. "Look at this watch. Swiss. Gold. Never short of a penny, you notice, these Jews. You can pick up all sorts for a song." We had come to the corner of our street. Overhead, the scarlet buyer sign hung on its bracket. I could hear music. I saw the curved oak case of Franz and Freddie Bayer's radio. How beautiful it was. How far beyond anything I ever hoped of having for myself. And how it had shamed me. How it made me diminished and small. I said, "Policist Novak, what should I do if I know a crime has been committed?" "What have you been up to?" he said. I said, "Can you hear music? I don't think they're the sort of people that should have a radio. Aren't you a policeman? Go and do your job." I turned and ran home. My mother opened the door to me, and I was sick on the step and for a week was too ill to leave my bed. When I was able to eat, my father took me out for fresh air. When we came to the buyer shop, my father cuffed my shoulder and said, "See this? Those people down from Hamburg with their fine clothes and their music? Turned out they were Jews all along. Heard it from Policist Novak. Forged papers, the works. Well, off they go to Theresienstadt with the rest of their kind." Trembling, I asked to be taken home. A month later, shortly before my mother's birthday, I said to my father that she might like a radio. I said that Policist Novak might know where one could be found. But when her birthday came, her gift was a new cotton housecoat to wear as she swept the shop floor. May 1945. I was 19. We were taken to stand with a handful of other Germans, who looked, as I suppose we did, made gaunt by hunger and sleeplessness. "All right," said a Czech official. "On we go." I saw a small crowd coming down the road, shouting, dragging a man on his knees. The official sighed and turned to face the crowd. "What have we here?" A woman had taken a military jacket from a soldier and wore it over a white cotton blouse. She said, "Look at him! Collaborator! Pig!" The crowd loosed its grip on the captive, who dropped to his knees. He raised his head, and helplessly I moved towards him because it was Policist Novak. The Czech official said, "Do you know this man? Who is he?" Novak looked at me. Slowly I understood that I had his life in my pocket. If I called him Polizist Novak, as my mother used to do, he would be damned for a German, as I was damned, and boys would come and tie cloths soaked in petrol around his neck, and they would set him alight. If I called him Rodney Novak, he would be taken for a check, and he would be saved. Novak, I said. And at that moment, the morning sun was extinguished, as if a great black cloth had been thrown over it. There were no stars. Jackdaws descended from every quarter, and Melmoth was coming implacably down the street. She came rimmed with light, with a bright bluish light like that from a gas flame. Her robes lifted around her as she walked. Thousands of yards, it seemed to me, of fine black cloth, so fine it ran like liquid into the gutters as she walked. Her feet were bare and bleeding, and the Prague streets were marked with footprints in blood. She came near, and I smelt her then, sweet as lilies in summer, rotten as spoiled meat. I was not afraid. Had I not been waiting for her all my life? Ever since I'd seen the farmer by the Eger leaving out his chair. She came slowly to me, and she said nothing, and then she fell to her knees at my feet. Her eyes hung in the bones of her face like spheres of smoky glass, and they contained every wickedness imagined or acted on. Then she spoke, and her voice was soft and appealing. "Joseph," she said, "what are you doing here? What do you think you will do?" She pointed at Novak. I said, "How can I let him die? He is my friend." "Your friend?" She stood, and she began to laugh. "And how do you treat your friends, little Hoffman? Shall I show you what your friendship does?" I began to faint against her until I was almost dreaming, and in my dream I saw a railway track that ended at the gate of Theresienstadt, and all around it no grass grew. I saw a boy with his head shaved for lice stoop to pick a horse chestnut from the gutter, and saw him struck 5 times with a club for this breach of the law. And I saw a starved girl brought before the authorities because someone had heard her sing, and I knew this boy and this girl were Franz and Freddy Bayer. "Who else will know your wickedness as I know it?" the woman said. "Who else has seen what it is in your heart as I have seen it? What if they knew, little Hoffman? What if they saw?" "If I am punished, it would only be just," I said. But I did not feel courageous. Do flames burn less because they are just? She touched me, and I felt a pain in my wrist, as if my arm were pinned to the ground and someone had quietly and calmly crushed it with rocks. Then she took away her hand, and the pain was gone. As I stood gasping in the street, she spoke to me shyly and quietly, as if she were afraid I might turn and run. She said, "Joseph, don't you pity me? Have you never known what it is to be lonely?" I have never heard a voice more seductive. "Come away and be my companion. What is left for you but suffering? What is left but the just outcome of all your iniquity?" "But what then will become of Polizist Novak? How can I leave him here alone to be beaten in the street?" She whispered against my cheek, "But what can you do? You are only a schoolboy. Let it be. Take my hand. I've been so lonely." She held out her hand, and the temptation was like every hunger pang I'd ever felt tormenting me at once. I reached towards her, and her face altered, and I saw triumph in it. Then I looked at Novak. I said, "No." It It was the sole act of courage of my life. Instantly she changed. All the softness and all the appeal left her, and I was afraid. She was gaunt and tall and terrible to look at. Her mouth was red and wide, and her unblinking eyes flickered, and blood pooled at her feet. "Stupid boy," she said. And she was shrieking now, and jackdaws were all around her like flies around a dead dog. "Do you think you can atone for all you've done? I have seen your punishment. I have already been the witness." I could not bear to hear her more or look at her. I closed my eyes and pressed my hands to my ears, and when I took them away, I heard a man's voice, and the Czech official was impatient, and he was saying, "Do you know this man?" I looked. Melmoth had gone, and it was morning again. Novak was on his knees, and he was looking at me. "I know him," I said. "He knew who lived there in that shop. He knew they were Jews, and he did nothing." "Is this true?" said the Czech official. Dumbly as a dazed animal, Novak nodded and nodded. The woman made a sound which was part boredom and part disgust, and released his collar. He pitched forward onto the street. In time, I too was taken to Theresienstadt. And there I lived in confinement for 19 months and 13 days. At all times I wondered if I walked where Franz and Freddie Bayer walked, and if I suffered as they suffered, and considered all my sorrows and my pains little but an afterthought. But I make no record of it. Let them be the song, and I the dying echo.
Helen Franklin, 42, neither short nor tall, about her shoulders a cashmere stole, very fine, very black, falling from collarbone to foot, a dress which is too long and too large. She sits at a marble table and surveys her dining companions. Here is Albina Horakova. She has drunk 2 glasses of Bohemia Sekt. Here is Thea, whose wheelchair has been folded against the wall. She is sombre in a pleated dress shirt, and someone has cut her curls. Seated beside her, chair drawn solicitously close, is the young woman Adaya, who has made no concession at all to the festivity of the occasion, save that her blouse this evening has a faint blue stripe. Albina, in her white velvet coat, is coquettish and voluble, making girlish requests for another candle, another bottle in a silver bucket, the dishes of food she's ordered in advance. It is early, but a man in a white dinner jacket is merry enough to sit at the grand piano and play with charming ineptitude an Austrian waltz that slides soon into familiar songs. Delighted, all his nearby companions lift bottles of beer and sing. "Well, I have news," says Thea. "I've had a letter. Carol is in England, and Helen alone will understand my amusement, in Bedford." Helen cannot help but laugh. "What's more," says Thea, "he has fallen in with a group of students and has decided that his lot in life, for the moment at least, is to protest the unlawful detention of migrants." Thea tears a piece of bread and the scent of caraway rises from the table. "He says there is no Melmoth. There is no one to witness what's done these days, and so he will simply have to do it himself." "But why?" Adaya flushes very faintly. "What use is it? What good does it do? To watch?" "I don't know," she says. She's frowning. But perhaps he feels he must do his duty, even if no good will come of it. Then she turns towards Helen. "You haven't slept." "Melmoth, was it?" "Something like that." Helen presses her hands on the marble table, which is very cool. Then she says, "Someone is following me." "Helen," says Thea. She looks both reproving and secretly, maliciously thrilled. I didn't think you'd fall for it like Carol did. You of all people. No, it's not Melmoth, says Helen. But Thea, someone is following me. I hear them behind me. They wait round corners. They wear black. Sometimes they sing. I don't know if it's a man or a woman, or even a child, but it frightens me. Adaya says, I once heard a mother in a playground tell her child, watch out for Melmoth. She knows you took my purse. She has her eye on you. Very cruel, I thought. I don't think Melmoth comes to take children from their mothers. She is not a monster. Then you know little about her, says Thea. Don't you pity her? Adaya says. Wouldn't you long for company if you were so lonely? Wouldn't you, Helen? Oh, perhaps, she says. I think, says Thea, we may safely say it's not a damned soul on bleeding feet that chases you through the town. Who then? Albina Harakova nudges Helen and says, she's got a past, this one. Thinks I don't notice. Thinks I don't see how she sleeps without sheets and won't eat sweet things and scratches her wrists when she thinks I'm not looking. Made them bleed once. I noticed, yes. Helen Franklin, you got something to hide? I suppose, says Adaya gently, nobody has ever lived who didn't keep something in their pocket out of sight. Not me, says Albina, and without warning delivers a gleeful belch. It is greeted with applause from men in suits at a window table. This Melmoth, she'd have no interest in old Albina Horakova, who never hurt a fly. But what about Thea, then, eh? You think Melmoth is waiting at home, on your bed, with your name on a piece of paper? Helen is grateful to feel Albina's blue gaze move on. She says, yes, Thea, what about you? What sins do you have to confess? Frowning, Thea says, I sometimes wish she were real, that she had come for me before Carol went, while I was still myself. I might have preferred to wander alone with the damned than find I'm no longer loved. Do you despair? Says Adaya. It is a curious question, very direct, and asked with a blush. So often, people do. Thea says, as if with surprise, no, I don't think I do. I wonder if I should. Enough of this talk, says Albina. You think you know suffering? You wait and see what time does to your bones and come speak with me about suffering then. Come now, Thea, she says. If Melmoth were watching, what sin would she know? The very worst. I expect, Adaya says, it was when you were very young. So often it is. Helen, make them stop, says Thea. But she brightens and straightens with a clumsy flourish, the napkin in her lap. I didn't always have money. My mother brought me up on her own in a 2-room flat on a miserable North London road. I wanted money almost more than anything, so I began to steal. My mother kept a notebook where she wrote down everything she spent and everything she earned. She kept her money in a biscuit tin. Every day, almost, I took coins out. I wanted a suede jacket for my birthday with fringes at the back. I'd seen how much they cost, and I knew it would always be beyond my mother, but I wanted to punish her for making me poor. On the morning of my birthday, she gave me a gift, a book, I don't know what. I said, I don't want this. You know what I wanted. Didn't you listen? Don't you care? She cried. Told me she'd been saving for something special, but that she never seemed to have quite enough, that she tried to make a note of everything she earned, but had made a mistake somewhere. All the time, of course, I could feel the money I had stolen in my pocket, getting heavier and heavier, because I never spent it. Horrible! Albina is delighted. Horrible child! Adaya, hands folded in her lap, says, Do you think you have been punished? Thea gestures with a rare, hard flash of anger to her legs. What do you think? And do you think the punishment is fitting?" "Still," says Helen, "if Melmoth sought out every scheming little thief in North London, she'd hardly be lonely." Adaya smiles, blushes, touches Thea lightly on the wrist. "I think we might rule you out," she says, "unless, of course, you have secrets too dark for the dinner table." "Now," Thea says, "Melmoth the witness versus Helen Franklin in the court of King Wenceslas in the lands of the Bohemian crown. Dear Helen, so calm, so considered, who never says a word out of place. What can her sin be?" "I should like to know," says Adaya, and says it with that hesitant, appealing look from behind her glasses, so that Helen overhears herself saying, as if from a great distance, "When I was 21, I left home and travelled to Manila. I'd never really been abroad before." Scratching the bite on her arm and thinking nothing of it, Helen left her flat. She taught English to the 19 girls that lived in the QAF's well-appointed home and found her duties easy. That evening she discovered on her arm a swollen place the size of her palm, the centre of which had opened up, creating a small uneven cavity. In one of the alleys beneath Aurora Boulevard, she knew, there was a pharmacy. She stood for a moment in light cast on the pavement by the green cross shining above the shuttered window, and pushed open the door. Behind the counter, a young man greeted her. He wore his hair rather long and had combed it with a parting which might have given him a look of severity had he not been smiling when he saw his visitor. "Can you help me?" said Helen. "I need someone to tell me what to do." "Of course. The pharmacist is not here until the morning, but I am in training and we have everything you might need. Are you sunburned? It's often sunburn with tourists." "I'm not a tourist." "No?" He took a pair of glasses from his pocket and put them on. "I work at the QAF, the Quezon Aid Foundation," she said, then wished she hadn't. He raised an eyebrow and smiled and said, "Okay, that's very good of you." There was silence. Helen looked at him and could not remember what it was that had brought her here. "All right then," said the young man briskly. "What can we do for you?" "It's this," said Helen. She came forward and placed her forearm on the counter. The man grasped her wrist and drew her arm towards him. He rolled it this way and that, the better to inspect the wound. It was both intimate and absolutely disinterested, and Helen was conscious that she was holding her breath. "Something bit me," she said. "A cockroach?" "Sure thing," he said. "This needs cleaning. Want me to do it for you? I have hydrogen peroxide. Then you should have penicillin. The pharmacist would say the same. Does it make you sick?" "No, it doesn't," said Helen. Then she said, stumbling and shyly, "Thank you, Kuya." Delighted, he laughed. "You're welcome. You think you are younger than me. I don't know, you seem old because you are quiet. Tell me your age." 21. "Okay then, little sister. I am 23. He laughed again. "You are the first American to call me Kuya. I like it. You can come back here any time." "I'm not American, I'm English," said Helen, laughing because he was laughing. When she returned to the pharmacy, it was proudly done, to show the young man the diminished scarlet circle on her arm and the healing wound. He was standing at the counter with his back to her, and at the sound of the opening door he made a hasty movement out of sight. Then he turned, and she saw that his eyes were swollen with lack of sleep. He held a small leather bag, which he quickly closed and hid behind the counter. Then he smiled and said, "Little sister, how is it? You still have your arm, at least." "I wanted to show you," said Helen. She went forward and stretched out her hand. "Look, almost gone." Then she said, "Are you all right?" He met her query without surprise. "Bad news last night," he said. "My brother Benji crashed his motorbike. Broken hip, broken pelvis, the nerves in his spine bruised. It won't kill him, but—" "I'm so sorry. Will he be okay?" "Eventually. But he suffers, you know. I don't like to see it." I'm going there now." He was silent for a time, and Helen tenderly watched as he pushed back a lock of hair. Then he said, with a frank look of invitation, "Do you want to come with me?" And Helen said, "I'd like that, thank you. My name is Helen, by the way." "Arnel Suarez," said the young man. He smiled and looked a little less weary. "Nice to meet you, little sister." Benji Suarez slept in a small ward on the ground floor of a shabby hospital. He said something swiftly to his brother, and Helen understood that she was unwelcome. "I'll leave you with him, Kuya. Maybe I'll go find some water," she said, and went swiftly out. At the end of the corridor there was a doorway from which the door had been removed. It was all very quiet, but a sound entered the silence, a kind of rooting, scratching sound. It stopped, and then began again, more frantically. Helen crept forward towards the empty doorframe and saw, on a hard chair just beyond the door, a woman who slumped as if very weary. She wore long, loose black clothes, and it seemed that in this room were many fans blowing against the heat, since the clothes moved about. Then the seated woman began to raise her head. The fabric that draped across her feet lifted, and Helen saw that they were bare and bleeding. Turning away, she heard her own name called down the corridor and went gratefully towards it. Arnel stood at the doorway, beckoning her in. His brother was sleeping now. "He was in pain," he said, "but he's better now." And unconsciously he nodded towards the bed, and Helen saw on the patient's bare upper arm a square plaster, thick and white and very clean. They fell in love, Helen Franklin and Arnel Suarez, little sister, older brother. It had a quality of being inevitable or of being meant, as if each had been fitted for the other and now served their proper purpose after years of aimless misuse. Though they visited Benji often, he grew no fonder of Helen in that time. She discovered that those small, square plasters were a way of easing the kind of pain that would drive you mad if you let it. "Fentanyl," said Arnel. He simply helped himself to the pharmacy store now and then, amending records as required, confident he would not be caught. "The thing is to be careful," said Arnel, putting a plaster on his brother's back, pressing it with his palm. "He wants more and more, but in the end it'll kill him if he lets it." Whenever she felt unwelcome, Helen felt herself drawn to the narrow corridor beyond the little ward. One afternoon, made brave by curiosity, she went in. The room was small and dark. A single bed was set against the far wall. The chair, where she had seen the weary woman with the bleeding feet, was empty. Helen made out the figure on the bed. A woman, very thin, lying naked under a thin sheet. The woman's head, which had been turned away, rolled against the thin pillow, and dark eyes met Helen's. They were vast and wet. They regarded her with a steadfast appeal. Her nose was only 2 black slots above an upper lip half gone. As Helen watched, she gave out a high, sustained moan. Appalled, Helen turned and ran. Walking blindly down the corridor, she jostled a nurse with an armful of linen and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." Evidently there was something in her voice which gave the nurse pause. He smiled. "Ah, you have been in that room. It's not good or fair what happened." "What did happen?" said Helen. The nurse shrugged. "Her lover thought she was a cheat, threw acid on her, teach her a lesson." Helen swallowed at bile rising in her throat. "Will she get better?" Does she have family that comes to see her? No family. We do what we can, but I think the acid goes on burning. Every day it goes a bit deeper, gets to her bones. I asked the Blessed Virgin to take her, but still she goes on. Is she in pain? Oh, yes, too much. We do what we can about the pain, but the itching we can't stop. Why does no one help her? The nurse shook his head. What can we do? There's no help, no hope. He paused and smoothed at the folded sheets in his arms. You want to help? There's a chair in her room, always empty. Sit in it. Not always empty, thought Helen. 2 days passed, and Helen sat on the little stool set beside the bed. The woman blinked. Tears were pressed out from beneath the lowered lids. I'm Helen, she said, and touched the arm that lay on the sheet. The woman in the bed moaned, very faintly, but with surprise and almost with pleasure. A gardener working in the grounds outside turned on his radio, and music blew in. As if Rosa had been one of the smallest children at the Quezon Aid Foundation, Helen slipped her arm beneath the woman's shoulders and raised her from the pillow. She held a bottle of iced tea to Rosa's mouth and poured the liquid in. Outside, the worker with the radio had moved closer to the window, and Helen made out the words of a sentimental song. Oh, I loved this when I was young, she said, and put her hand on the woman's. I dreamt I dwelt in marble halls, with vassals and serfs at my side. Helen went on singing until it seemed Rosa was sleeping. Then she stood and moved quietly towards the corridor. When she reached the empty doorframe, she was arrested by a sound coming from the bed, and she realized Rosa was speaking. She had raised her head from the pillow with an effort that made her body tremble. Her voice was high and hoarse. She said, Mamatay, hayan mo kong mamatay. That evening, beside Arnel above Manila Bay, she said, I sat with her for half an hour, poor thing. You can't imagine how she suffers. I think she was calling for her parents when I left. She was saying something like, Mama, tatay, over and over. Oh, little sister, said Arnel Suarez. No, she was saying, let me die, let me die. On a Sunday, very bright and clear, Arnel met Helen in the shade of her apartment block. She held a bunch of cheap carnations. He kissed her and said, We had a call from the hospital. Benji's coming home. Then, I suppose this will be the last day I see her, she said. Arnel drew Helen into the shade of an electronics shop and put his hands on her shoulders. He looked very grave. You saw what I gave Benji, yes? The fentanyl. Of course. I have more. He shrugged. Take one for her. You put it on like a plaster. No one will see, no one will know. She'll just have peace for the day. Isn't some peace better than none? In Benji's room there was much to be done. Go on, said Arnel, giving Helen the leather bag. Go and see your friend. Do what you think is right. I trust you, little sister. Rosa, said Helen, wiping away the sweat and tears on her own cheek. I brought you flowers, look. I'll put them where you can see them. I can't come back. I'm sorry. Rosa gazed and gazed at her and began her silent weeping. Then she spoke, and Helen met the words before they reached her, knowing what was coming. My friend, let me die. Rosa, said Helen steadily, do you really want to die? The hand beneath hers twisted and moved palm upwards. The thin fingers threaded through hers, and very faintly Helen felt the movement of a stroking thumb. Thank you, said Rosa. and for a long moment her eyes looked lovingly at Helen. Then something struck at her nerves, her bones, and she arched back against the bed and began to wail. There was a final calculation in Helen, one last assessment of her own soul set against another's, of the likely cost of doing what must be done. She opened the bag. 7 white packets were concealed within a small square pocket. Steadily, Helen removed one. Rosa had turned to the wall, and the sheet had fallen from her shoulder. Softly, Helen placed the plaster there and pressed it with her palm. Helen stroked the thin, hard flank beneath the blotted sheet. I dreamt I dwelt in marble halls, with vassals and serfs at my side. She sang and went on singing. At 10 minutes past 8 in the evening, 3 days later, Arnel Suarez was arrested in his mother's home. It was not, the policeman said, merely a matter of stealing from a pharmacy. They were concerned, more properly, with the murder of a woman known as Rosa, done away with one afternoon by an overdose of opioids while she lay sleeping in her hospital room. Of all this, Helen understood only Rosa, Rosa, Rosa. Arnel was cuffed, his arms drawn behind his back. The men drew him politely and placidly towards the door. Helen opened her mouth, and she said nothing. Arnel turned and looked at her. In that look she saw query and comprehension, saw his image of her alter, break, and be remade. Arnel Suarez shook his head. "Sit down, little sister," he said. "Sit down." They are very quiet, very close, Helen Franklin's listeners. She clings to the table, and her fingers are sore. "I went home after that," she says. "They took him to prison. I suppose there was a trial. I couldn't bear to ask." A hand reaches hesitantly towards her. "What a very wicked thing you did," says Adaya. But the inflection is gentle, kind. "I know," Helen says. She is conscious of a feeling of lightness. Albina snorts. She's attending to a piece of Zacca-torta. "Fool of a boy, if you ask me," she says. "Nobody asked him, did they? Nobody said, 'Take the blame, take the punishment.' Did you? No. Well then, what was all this for? Miserable little English mish. He gave you a life, and what did you do but build your own prison? Idiot!" "I deserve it." "You know," says Adaya, cool hand on Helen's, "it is not always necessary to suffer, even when it's well-deserved." Her thumb moves, once, in a caress. Thea frowns, then she says, "We always tried to guess what it was, Carol and I. It is time to set a statute of limitation on your crime, little Helen." There is a piece of cake on a plate in front of Helen. It no longer seems to Helen impossible that she might take a bite, that she could permit herself the taste of sugar. She takes the fork and presses it through the glossy chocolate. Eat up," says Albina Horakova. She's putting on her velvet coat. Helen Franklin goes on eating. Albina Horakova has paid for a box. They are enclosed, these 4 women, in a velvet casket flanked by plaster gods. There are 3 seats and a stool. Adaya sits on the stool beside the door. She has the look of a sentinel. Nobody, thinks Helen, not even Melmoth, could pass without permission. Albina, leaning on the balcony edge, sheds a tear. This was always my favourite. I could go down on stage and sing it all for you now. Carol hated Rusalka, says Thea. Idiot of a girl, he said. Who'd give up eternal life for the sake of love? I suppose that was quite telling in its way. A baton is raised in the pit, and it is the signal for silence above and music below. Helen finds she is smiling. It seems she is on parole. She permits herself to indulge in the thrill of the rising curtain, which stirs also Thea in her seat, causes Albina to lean still more towards the stage. Here is Rusalka with her red gold hair, her alabaster skin with its greenish cast. Here is mist rising from the lake. Here also is the moon, freshly polished, an opal on a bit of velvet. The swooning water nymph stands and sings clear as a blackbird in the morning. Then Rusalka kneels. Her small hands cannot reach the moon. Black birds descend from high in the wings, and all their eyes are blue. They come down to the water nymph, who is singing now one single note which rings up to the gods. It is impossibly high, impossibly sustained. In wonder, Helen looks and sees Thea motionless, sees Albina Horakova leaning forward. On come the birds, very black, very real. Helen cannot see the wires that hold them. Still Rusalka sings that one high note and does not breathe or pause. Not when the birds are by her side. Not when there comes on stage a witch. Yerzy Baba, whispers Helen, delighted as a child, for she has read the programme, and indeed, here is all she'd hoped from that wicked enchantress. Beside kneeling Rusalka, the old witch is tall and wears a coarse black wig. It is long, this wig, and by some trickery moves of its own accord. Her robes also move, stirred by on-stage breezes. They are of the finest silk, worn very thin. They pool at her feet like spilled ink. Yerzy Baba, says Helen, turning to Thea, who remains motionless, fixed with wonder perhaps. But how can that single note go on? How can Rusalka still be singing? What soprano's trick is this that defies the need for breath? Helen begins slowly to rise from her seat, and there is the sensation in her throat of something very sharp lodged there. Down on the stage, the witch hangs her head as if in weariness and shame, then raises her hand. It comes slowly up, and it is pointing at her, pointing at what is kept concealed, what can never be set down. That weary head hanging forward begins to lift, and Helen dreads and longs for what's beneath the moving coils of hair. There is a sensation in her which is part terror and part desire. Her courage fails. She looks away. The air is full of the smell of lilies, and here, at last, out of the pages of the Hoffman document, is the face of Melmoth the witness. Her skin is dappled as though many shadows cross it, and her unblinking eyes are spheres of smoky glass. It is as strange as a nightmare and as familiar as home. There is a look on it of the most profound, unswerving devotion. Helen reaches out her hand over the balcony towards the stage, imagines the touch of Melmoth's palm, very hot perhaps, very soft against hers, coaxing her up, drawing her down. So after all, her parole has been revoked. She hears the slamming of the iron gates. But she hears also, very close by, a grunt and choke. It is Albina Horakova in a deep sleep brought on by wine, by good rich food, by the warm air rising from the velvet walls, the deep plush seats. She snores once more, and it is loud. Her head tilts back. The sound silences Rusalka down there on her knees. At last, that single ringing note stops. "I must go," says Helen. But Adaya is cool and calm on her stool beside the door, hands folded in her lap, a blushing sentinel. She catches Helen's eye. She smiles and puts a finger to her lips. Helen returns to her seat. Then, "Shh," says Thea, laughing. Albina is snoring still more loudly. There is another choking, gasping snore which is very long and very loud. But something is not right. The old woman's head has tipped too far. Her mouth hangs unevenly open. Helen takes Albina Horakova's wrist. There is no flutter there, no blood beating at the pulse. "It's nearly finished," says Adaya. She is standing. "But we hated each other," says Helen, and cradles the cool, thin hand between hers. She feels a fissure open. She glides apart. She falls in the cavity. And all the griefs she has denied herself, for Rosa, for Arnell, for Thea, for Carol, for her own life, interred within a cardboard box, are waiting down there, in the unlit cul-de-sacs, the dark, unentered places she had no idea she contained. The city has wearied of winter. The place where the Christmas tree in the old town square played Strauss just 4 weeks back is empty and slick with ice. Helen reaches the Bridge of the Legions. It is empty. She stops on the curb and awaits the passing of a tram. It passes and reveals a man standing on the pavement opposite. He wears black trousers and a padded coat within which he is shivering. The black hood has fallen back. There is little hair left on his head. He raises his right hand. He's carrying something in his left. "Arnell," says Helen. It is no surprise to see him there, because he is not alone. Josef Hoffmann, boy of 15, is just behind his shoulder. She walks in a daze along the freezing banks of the Vltava. The man with the broken glasses follows her. Thea waits in the appointed cafe. "You are late. Never did I think I'd see the day. But Helen, darling, have you been ill? Sit down, won't you? What is it? What's happened? What have you seen?" Helen turns her back on Arnell Suarez, who waits patiently outside. Obediently she sits. "Is it Melmoth?" says Thea teasingly. A girl in a white shirt brings 3 glasses and a bottle wet from the ice. "Melmoth," Helen says. "Josef Hoffmann. They have been with me for days." "Won't you pour?" says Thea. It is evident she has concluded that Helen is indulging in the absurd. "I'll only make a mess of it. Adaya said she would come." "Last night," says Helen, "I had Rosa in my bed." "Then you've had a temperature to be seeing things like that. Poor thing. I think she's been watching me all along. I think even that I might not have done it if I hadn't felt her watching me." "How odd. There is somebody on the pavement, just standing there in the cold." "Oh, yes," Helen smiles. "I told you. Hoffmann." She does not say Melmoth, because it is both too much to hope for and too much to dread. "Drink up before it gets cold. It's a man in a black coat with the hood up. His glasses are broken. He looks sick." Helen's blood surges in her like a tide dragged by the moon. She cannot speak. "Poor man ought to come in out of the cold. He's shaking." "Do you see him then?" "Of course I see him. I may be a wrecked ship, Helen, but my eyes are all they ever were." "Is he alone?" "Yes. Strange how quiet it is today." Helen turns in her seat. The cafe has 3 windows, long and deep, which face the cobbled street. In the middle window, precisely in the centre of it, stands the man in the hooded coat. His face is up against the glass. He raises his hand and presses his palm to the window. Helen Franklin stands. She shudders. Her hip knocks the table and Thea's glass breaks on the floor. Thea says, "Do you know him? Helen, what is it? You're frightening me." "He's here," says Helen. Frantically she looks for Hoffman. If he is there, Arnell is not. But no, it is only that solitary figure, patiently waiting. So it was him who has followed you all this time. What does he want? Helen's voice is high, querulous, plaintive. She sees him at the door. His hood has fallen back, and she can almost make out, behind the gaunt, loose skin, gone sallow from confinement, behind the high forehead, which has lost its thick, dark fringe, Arnell Suarez. "I did that," she says, "because it is not merely time that has decayed Arnell." He's on the threshold now, and he's carrying a plastic bag. Thea, leaning on the table, shaking with the effort of standing on wasted legs, says, "You will have to face him, Helen. There's no way out, I'm afraid." The door closes, the velvet curtains part, and here he is. All his movements are slow, considered, and his hands are shaking. The greenish light gives his face a still more sickly look. He comes forward. He stops. "Helen, little sister," he says. And then there's a violent bang. The women are startled out of their stupor, and the man flinches and drops what he carries on the table. They all turn. High up on the centre window there is now the imprint, very plain to see in the thin cold light, of a bird. The uplifted wings, the smooth full breast, glint on the glass. The shock of it rouses Helen from her disbelief. She studies the man who stands closer now, wringing his hands. There is nothing there to frighten her. He says, "I have come a very long way, and I'm very tired. Can I sit down?" Thea, regaining her customary control by degrees, says, "Of course you must sit. Here." She holds out her hand. "I am Thea," she says. "I'm a friend of Helen's." The man looks at the outstretched hand, bewildered, then grasps it with both his. He clings to her. "Ma'am, thank you," he says. "Thank you. My name is Arnell Suarez." Helen rubs absently at the scar on her forearm. "Is it you?" she says. Still she doubts it, and well she might. What is there in this small, cringing, gaunt old man with his broken glasses and torn plastic bag to make her think of her lover? He fumbles with the bag and takes out a child's exercise book. It is stained. The corners roll and fold. "Look." He opens it with care. "I made it for you," he says. "I wanted you to know what I did for you." "But what do you want?" says Helen. "What can I do? What can I say?" "I went to the QAF the day I came out. Then I wrote to your family at the old address. Asked where you were. I am sorry. I just wanted you to see." Humbly he pushes the book across the table. Helen will not touch it. "Let me look." Thea cannot conceal her curiosity. She draws the book towards her and flicks through the pages. It has the look of a sketchbook kept by a student, drawings in ink and black pencil, annotated, erased, drawn over. 19 years, says Arnell Suarez. I said I was innocent. But then, it was a long time before the trial. A year. I lost heart. I didn't care. Here, says Thea. It is not that she doesn't pity him. Her attention is merely elsewhere. She points at a page, turns it, points at another, at a barely sketched figure in black outside a barred window or standing watchful at the corner of a yard. This woman, here, at the edge of the page, and here at the foot of the bed. We saw her sometimes. Not all the men, but some. When things were bad. Just watching. Some of the men called her Scacchi, and thought she'd come back. Scacchi, he said, means witness. What do you want? Says Helen again. He says, humbly, you don't have to give me anything. I want to know it counted. That was how I stood it all that time, knowing you were free. Kuya, says Helen. Older brother. Listen. There is the sound of something striking the window. Then another and another. It is jackdaws coming so thickly down the street the light of the winter sun is obscured. The cafe darkens. The lights glow more ardently behind their green glass domes. The glass cracks. Thea says, there she is, without surprise or horror. She is coming. Helen, shaken, finds herself coming closer to the man who has risen from his seat. Adaya, says Thea, who is on her feet. And look, it is Adaya, coming in view, to your left, to the first of the windows. She is smiling in her hesitant way, and her young face is flushed with the cold. Then she passes from view and appears again, in that window where Arnell stood and pressed his palm against the glass. Adaya is tall now, and her smile is gleeful and merry and red, and her hair is dark and long, and it lifts with the wind. Look! Again she is gone, slipped out of sight. Again she appears in the third window, the last, which is beside the door. Adaya, but by no means Adaya. In black clothes of a fine, thin fabric, many layers of it that trail behind her like a shadow, that snare the panicked jackdaws, that drip like spilled ink in the gutters. She is monstrously tall. Her gaunt face flickers with passing shadows. She grins. And here she is, on the threshold between the parted curtains. Melmoth the witness. She is smiling. Her feet are bare and bleeding. I have come, she says. Helen, my friend, did you know it was me? I hoped you would know. I even told you my true name, which I have not heard spoken since the days of my transgression. Adaya, says Helen, and all the lamps grow dim. My own mother named me witness. Did she see my curse at the hour of my birth? Oh, Helen, my loved one, you have waited for me long enough. I knew. Helen cannot take her eyes from those of the witness. They hold hers with an unblinking, implacable gaze. Was it you, in Rosa's room, beside the door on the chair? The chair was left for me. I saw you. I heard you sing. Then you know what I am. You know what I have done. She is very close now. Lightly she puts out a hand, touches Helen on her shoulder. Her palm is warm and very soft, and Helen, who's denied herself so much, responds with something like desire. My love, the hand moves in a caress. I know what you are. I have always known. How could you fool me, whose eyes have never left you? You are tired. Won't you rest your head on my shoulder? And Helen is drawn down in arms that wrap her like a winding sheet. Let me show you what you did. Helen, half dreaming, sees a jail cell. It is scarcely larger than the room where she sleeps, and it contains 20 men. They lie on a concrete floor which is wet with monsoon rains that pour from gutters overhead. There is Arnel, young, squatting, his face buried in his hands. "You see?" Her voice is very soft, very sweet. It is the voice of a lover. "You see what you did? It would have been better for him if you'd never been born. Who would want you now? Who could bear to look at you if they knew what I knew, if they'd seen what I have seen?" "I know. Then come away with me. What remains for you here but shame and disgrace? Won't you take my hand? I've been so lonely." The old heart is beating beneath Helen's cheek, and the scent of flowers is heady and rich. She is tired. It would be so easy and so sweet to submit. Helen says, "Is there no hope?" "None, but a loving companion in your despair." No hope, then, thinks Helen. But she cannot believe it. She looks down, and there on the table is Arnel's notebook. It has fallen open at a place where he's drawn a garden. This garden is in a valley, and above it there is a mountain, and the peak is obscured by cloud. Deep in the valley, scarcely more than a scribble of a worn-out pencil, are 2 figures standing close. Lightly she touches the page. It offers, in its little sketch, something she thought beyond her grasp: the prospect of redemption by meeting hope with hope. She says, "No, I won't go with you." Helen is thrust from Melmoth's arms, and the eyes that hang in that gaunt face are burning blue. "You reject me? You, a murderer, a coward? You would leave me here to my sorrow, to my solitude." I am sorry for it. And it is true, because what Helen feels now is pity. But I do have hope. I feel it in here, like a pain. I must try. I must. There is a change in Melmoth. She is grinning now, and her mouth is wide and red. She says, "Idiot!" and begins to laugh, a laugh which has in it as much misery as wickedness. "Then I will leave you here to wallow in your shame. Do you think you can be redeemed? There is nothing you can do to make the balance even." All the lights in their green shades go out one by one, and there is movement now at the window. Jackdaws in their hundreds, in a frenzy, hurling themselves in stupid rage against the glass. Melmoth is shrieking, but Helen cannot make out the words. Then the window shatters. Then it is light again, and Thea is saying, "She is coming," and is half rising from her seat. And the glass in the window is cracked, and there is the imprint of a bird. "Oh, I thought I saw a dyer." She shrugs, does not see how white Helen is, how she leans against Arnel. "She was here," says Helen. "She was here, and now she's gone." "Little sister," Arnel says, "I don't want anything. Can't you sit here with me?" Arnel puts his hand on the chair beside him and looks at her with a shy and frank appeal. She sits down. She says, "I've got so little to tell you." "There." Thea surveys them both with a placid, contented air, as if their presence together has all been her doing. Now, Arnel, will you forgive us if we make a toast? We came to raise a glass to a friend who died. She was old and dreadful, but we miss her. She lifts her glass. To Albina Horakova, she says. The streets are busy, and nobody pays Helen any mind. Arnel stumbles on the cobblestones, and Sia on her crutches is slow. Come on, says Helen. She offers each a hand. Look, it is midnight on the Vltava. The banks are white with sleeping swans and ice that creeps from east to west. Look at this solitary figure leaning on the high stone balcony, gazing down into the river with an eternal and absolute solitude. Doesn't pity light an ember in your heart? Don't you long to reach out your hand? My listener, my dear, you know her. You have been waiting for her. It is I, Melmoth, whose voice you have heard all these hours. Didn't you know? Didn't you guess? Dear heart, I have watched you so long. I saw what you did when you shouldn't have done it. But, my love, I won't leave you here to bear it on your own. I have walked to you on bleeding feet. Who else could want you like this? Oh, my friend, my darling, won't you take my hand? I've been so lonely.